You're listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 481.
Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Station, and in this slightly longer podcast we're talking about adventure and what it can mean to different people. Everywhere you look these days, the words adventure and challenge seem to leap out at you from every crevice. TV, radio, magazines, social media and charities are all banging on about you undertaking some kind of challenge or having an adventure, either for yourself or to benefit others. Everything from crewing a yacht across the ocean, climbing a 2,000-metre peak, cycling the breadth of a country, running through the desert, swimming an ocean, and so on. The typical accepted challenge has to be big. It has to be tough, it has to be uncomfortable, and ideally quite miserable at times, for it to be classed and accepted within the media as a true adventure. Or does it? Alastair Humphries, someone who we might typically think of as a professional adventurer, has done all kinds of extreme things involving many of these adjectives. Just look at his biog in the show notes. It's a pretty impressive CV. You may have seen or heard him in the media recently, extolling the virtues of micro-adventures, which puts these mini-challenges within reach of so many more people. Suggestions that sleeping on the top of a local hill for just one night will challenge many just as deeply as climbing that 2,000-metre peak would be for others. Stepping out of your comfort zone, walking in the woods at night, skinny dipping in the river, sleeping under the stars, singing in public, and so on means facing up to your biggest fears. And this could be just as much of a rewarding personal adventure as taking one of the established epic big trips. Therefore, I ask, is adventure and challenge really more about stepping out of your comfort zone, exposing yourself to vulnerability, to risk, to fear and uncertainty? Alastair decided to do just that. He wanted to take himself to the edge and step off. Taking some of his own advice, he decided to follow Laurie Lee's trail in his 1930s book As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning, sharing the same spirit as the great man himself. That is, to empty his pockets of everything but his passport, put the absolute basics in a rucksack, wear just the clothes on his back, buy a violin, and, with no musical skill, make his way across Spain, living purely on the money he earned from busking. Oh, and he only started violin lessons 6 months before.
The purpose of my adventure in Spain was to try to scare myself and surprise myself and have a genuine, thrilling adventure, which I realised is something that I hadn't had for quite a few years in doing more traditional outdoorsy stuff, hiking, running, biking, camping kind of stuff. And the reason was that I've done so much in the outdoors that I'm quite good at it, as anyone should be after 20 years. And once you get good at something, then it loses the element of some of its uncertainty and surprise. And so what I wanted to try and do was find a way to go back to being a beginner and to have that thrill of a blank slate and no idea what's going to happen. And just like you do on your very first big adventures, whatever they might be. So that was the initial idea for Spain. How can I look a bit differently at what adventure means to me, and how can I get maximum terror was what I was after, really.
I suppose it would be true to say that due to technology and the amount of data that's around these days for people in whatever area they wish to test themselves adventure-wise, it actually has, I'd say, become easier. You still have to physically do it, but the information is there. And I think the impression that this book has left on me and what I've seen so far is how much more challenging it is to have less and not more.
Yeah, I think the information age we live in is a mixed blessing in many ways, and it's great in that it facilitates more people getting into the outdoors. And if you're planning a trip, you can plan it to whatever level of paranoia you have. So you can really plan. And there's a time and a place for that, of course. But equally in adventure, there's a time for spontaneity and controlled chaos. And by that, I mean just trying to trust yourself to figure out whatever might happen, and therefore to just sort of throw yourself on the mercy of the adventure a little bit more. And some situations lend themselves to that more than others. But I think the good thing about traveling in a country where it's about the interactions you have with people as much as anything else is that the more relaxed you can be, the more open to detours and diversions and random suggestions, the better your adventure will be. And the more that you're stuck to some sort of fixed itinerary or some fixed plan in your head of what the trip is supposed to be, I think that becomes a much more limited experience than just turning up somewhere. So when my walk through Spain, I didn't really look at the map of where I was walking until day one, when I unfolded the map and saw, oh, I've got about 500 miles to go. This looks interesting. And just having that the freedom to follow my nose made it a really special experience.
So for our listeners who perhaps wouldn't be aware of the original book that inspired you, just give us a little bit of an overview for people who are coming to this for the first time about the story and your part in it.
In 1935, a young Englishman called Laurie Lee, who you might remember from your school day readings of Side with Rosie, when he grew up a bit, he was 19, he decided that he wanted to go on a big adventure, as a lot of young people do. So he walked out one midsummer morning, it's the title of the book, to head out into the world. And he ended up walking across Spain in the 1930s, playing his violin to earn the money he needed for his trip. And the story he wrote about it is a beautiful, poetic, pretty simple adventure. You know, nothing particularly drastic happens, but I first read it when I was a student, and it just really captured my imagination. It's beautiful writing, and it had this simplicity of adventure, which I really yearned for, just embracing whatever happens, sleeping on hilltops, and just being out in the world. And ever since I've read the book, I've dreamed of doing that trip myself. I thought for years it would make a great book to go follow him. It would make a great film to do it. But in order for it to have a sense of adventure, I felt I had to have the violin. You know, if I turned up and just followed Laurie Lee's walking route through Spain with my wallet, that would feel to me like a sort of pensioner's walking holiday, and I'm not yet quite ready for those. So to have an adventure, it needed the violin to give it that sense of urgency. But I can't play the violin or any other musical instrument, and actually performing in public, doing musical stuff is one of my greatest fears, embarrassments. You know, I hate karaoke. I hate dancing. It terrifies me. So I realized that I kept putting it off for years and years and years and years. And eventually, after about 15 years of being a pathetic wimp, I finally said to myself, I need to do this. If I want to try and get a different take on adventure, what I need to do is something that will scare me. I need to try and learn the violin. So I learned for 7 months, which I realized is nowhere near sufficient time to get any good at the violin. I was absolutely terrible, but I turned up in Spain with no money at all, only my violin, and set out to try and follow his route as far as Madrid, seeing if I could survive only with the money I earned from busking.
So the romance started the day that you set foot in Spain, and it's interesting to refer back to your previous comment about the simplicity of things, of looking at the map for the first time when you arrived there. That strikes me as really taking it right to the edge of possibilities, and I've watched your video clips of your first performance, and I really, really felt for you. I'll play a bit in a second on the podcast. I really felt for you, and you went through that terror that we all do when we just expose ourselves completely in front of an unknown audience.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, the fact that I literally didn't look at the map is blasé and nonchalant, but that goes to show, you know, I've I've spent 20 years of my life walking through the countryside, looking at maps, finding hills to sleep on. I do that a lot. So in that sense, none of that is the adventure for me. I'm completely comfortable. I could get on my bike now with a passport and cycle to China. I've done that before. But what I haven't done before is stand up in a small village square with no money in my pocket and think, crikey, if I want to eat today, I have to play. And it's very interesting when I talk to people about this trip, because if you talk about something like rowing in the Atlantic Ocean, people you can grasp that, okay, that sounds quite scary in a storm. And yet when I talk about violining in a little square, that really connects with people in a much deeper way. Just that sense of embarrassment and shame and worrying what people think about us. And it seems that all these primary school playground fears we used to have, it seems that we don't grow out of them as adults at all. And that first morning when I stood up to play was just an absolutely mortifying, humiliating, frightening experience. And I was just desperately trying to think of an excuse. How can I give up this stupid idea and get out of it with some shred of dignity intact?
I think combined with that, you were also recording yourself undertake this moment in your life, and to show people that, I think everybody like me in the audience, when they see that, must be really sitting there going, oh God, that has got to be the worst. Let's take a moment, dear listener, to paint some pictures here. 6 months prior to his departure for Spain, he found an unsuspecting local violin teacher and explained quite enthusiastically his big plan.
My plan is next summer to walk across Spain on my own, with no credit card or money, and just my violin, busking to live and eat.
Yeah.
Do you think that's possible in 6 months?
Uh,
I've done grade 2 piano when I was about 10, and I hated it.
D, 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 like that.
This isn't going to earn me much money, this one, is it? The famous first screech, then. That is worse than I thought it was going to be. Oh man.
You stop.
What am I doing? This is a really terrible idea.
And so Alastair arrived in Spain 6 months later. Penniless and hungry, he set up his music stand in a small square where a few patrons were sitting chatting quietly on benches. He was now about to play in public for the very first time.
I'm feeling like an absolute idiot right now.
So recording a trip is well, that's a conversation itself, which we may or may not choose to have. But I really enjoy filming my experiences. But there was a certain irony in this trip in that it was a deliberately minimalist, penniless, simple month under the stars. But at the same time, I was also lugging around half a rucksack full of very expensive cameras and tripods. So it makes a lot more work for yourself. But I think it's not something to undertake lightly, deciding to film your adventures. But it's a creative side that I really love.
Well, we'll certainly come on to the contents of your rucksack later on. There's definitely something there to talk about, and I'm with you because it's the sort of thing that I do myself. Again, coming back to the listeners, what is the route that this journey encapsulated?
Laurie Lee arrived in a town called Vigo, which is in northwest Spain. It's close to the much more famous Santiago de Compostela. And the route that Laurie Lee took roughly goes from there to Madrid. It's a similar sort of route and similar landscapes to the very famous Camino de Santiago, but minus any infrastructure or millions of pilgrims. So I had the beautiful hills of Galicia to myself. Laurie Lee continued south from Madrid to all the way down to the Mediterranean. I got to Madrid. I had a month away, and then I was delighted to come back to my family and to real life again. So I just did the first 500 miles of Laurie's route.
And for clarity's sake, the map, did it give you, it's a Spanish version of footpaths or bridleways? Or what sort of tracks were available to you?
So I took two maps, just partly out of habit and as an old-fashioned person. I took a Michelin paper map. I think it was about 1 to 400,000. It's essentially their touring maps I used to use when I cycled around the world. But far more useful was the View Ranger app, which I had on my phone. And with that, I had the Spanish version of Ordnance Survey, which was brilliant. And it meant that I could do the vast majority of the trip off-road on footpaths and bridleways and old droving roads, the cañadas that the sheep get moved along. So a large amount of it was off-road or on very small, tiny little roads.
So is there, again, for people considering doing something like this, is there a good network to explore like that?
Oh, it was so beautiful. I absolutely loved it, particularly Galicia, the first few hundred miles of the trip. And then also the Sierra de Guadarrama, the mountains just north of Madrid, between Madrid and Segovia. That'd be a few days of absolutely beautiful hiking, which I can highly recommend. If you take it, basically gives you have a choice how much infrastructure and planning you want. So you can go from one extreme, which is the Camino de Santiago, which is a brilliantly mapped out network of footpaths with hostels and places to stay and people you'll meet and infinite amount of information on the internet. Or you can do what I did, which is just turn up and follow your nose and wander around. And sometimes you win with that and you get wonderful bits. Sometimes you end up on a bit of a dead end or walking down a road for a couple of hours. But I had a lovely time just following my nose through really, really pretty countryside. It actually reminded me a lot of Yorkshire Dales, but Yorkshire Dales with sunshine, which is a good combination.
A rare one as well.
Yeah.
Your daily activities then. Obviously, you were playing your violin. I use that term loosely. You were playing the violin to earn a crust and feed yourself and exist. And you were presumably not paying for any accommodation if you had that enough amount of money. You were wild camping as such. So just talk us through. Once you got out of the big city, because the big city is obviously a different lifestyle, I guess. But once you were sort of out of town and started to go through the villages. How did your day break down? Did you sort of play in every place you went through, or did you stop just do in the evenings or the mornings? How did it work?
I had a rule which was whenever I earned money, I had to spend it all immediately, and I did that so that the next time I arrived in a town tomorrow, I would be back to zero, back to hungry and frightened and vulnerable again. So it was quite a feast or famine approach to the trip. Essentially, I'd walk all day, usually about 20 miles or so, camp out in the evenings. I never had enough money for accommodation, but Spain in the summer, it was lovely camping out. I didn't have a tent, just sleeping in my sleeping bag. Washing in rivers, cooking on small little fires, and then every day or two, depending on the map, really, I'd drop down from the hills into a small little village to play. The playing would really just depend upon the village. So Spain Spain likes to do an incredible amount of sleeping. There are very few hours of the day when there are people outdoors in a Spanish village, which is very frustrating for a more routine Englishman. So ideally, I needed to arrive in a town in the couple of hours around lunchtime when people were out to do their shopping, and I would play them, and then for a couple of hours, and then there's a huge lull when everyone just goes back to bed for their long afternoon siesta. At first, I would try and do Englishmen marching on through the midday sun, but the Spanish sun in Spain, well, there's a reason people have siestas. It would demolish me. So I would have very long siestas sitting under a tree. And then when the evening cooled a bit, I'd do a few more miles, hopefully get to a town where I could play. If the village is too small, often I'd walk into the village, my heart would just sink. I'd think there's no way I can earn anything here, and I just have to keep walking, put myself on half rations and keep going till I got to the next village where I could play. Evening busking's nice because Spanish people come out into the cool hours, and then once I'd earned some money, I'd go spend it all on food, walk out of town and sleep and eat and get up in the morning and do it all again, every day for a month.
And what sort of amount of money did you earn then, or rather, what were you able to buy with the money that you earned roughly on a daily basis?
I was so rich. I lived like an absolute king. It was, you've heard how bad I am at playing. I'm terrible. I genuinely doubted whether I would earn any money. I was honestly expecting on this trip to have to rummage in dustbins or nick pizza crusts from outside cafe tables or pinch carrots in the field. I was honestly expecting to have to do quite a bit of that. But to my amazement, in a month, I earned 120 euros, which averages out to €4 a day, which you can live like an absolute king for that. So I was sometimes eating not only bread, but also banana sandwiches, cooking rice in the evening. I was just astonished by what a decadent experience I had. 120 euros is more money than any man needs for a month of life.
Phenomenal. And did you ever go to bed hungry?
I had a few nights of carrot sandwiches, but no, not really. I quite often had to go to half rations when a village was too small to play in. But, I was really conscious that I was doing the trip. I wanted to write a book about this, and I was really conscious as I was walking along. I was thinking, this book's going to be terrible because nothing bad is happening. I'm just having a wonderful, wonderful experience, and this is just amazing. So no, nothing bad happened at all, really. And I only stole one carrot from a field, and I did that just out of greed because they look quite juicy and nice.
You met, I presume, other musicians along the way. How were you received?
The first day I was too scared to busk, so I kept walking around the town for hours just procrastinating, and I saw eventually this other busker playing his recorder, and he was terrible, really rubbish. Those really rubbish buskers. But I looked at him with this sense of awe. I just thought, wow, you can play music. You are daring to play music. And I looked in his hat and I thought, you have earned money. I just was in complete awe of this guy. Eventually, I did get on to do it myself. A few other times I met musicians. I met a couple of Romanian. There's a lot of Romanians in Spain. I met a couple of Romanian buskers who were giving me some tips, and then were quite astonished at how bad I was. My favourite event, though, is one day I walked into a small town and I was drawn by the sound of music, and I found this guy playing the guitar. I started to chat with him. He and his family, they bought me a beer. I thought I needed to repay their kindness by performing for them. So there were a few people out there by now sort of playing guitars and mouth organs, and I tried to accompany them. And I was really excited by this. I thought, this is finally my chance to live the Laurie Lee dream, to a Spanish street party on a sunny afternoon. Perfect. But I could not. When another instrument was playing, I could not keep up at all. So after about 5 very embarrassing minutes, I gave up and failed. So my dreams of actually being a proper musician were a bit of a disaster. But everything else about the trip went well.
I thought I watched that video clip. I presume that's the video clip that you sent me. And the funniest part was the guy that was, or one of the guys that was sitting down there was obviously trying to sing, and you began playing and he covered his ears.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I love that. I'd fixed a GoPro to the front of my violin, so violin cam I thought of it as, and you can just see this guy blocking up his ears to try and hold the tune. It's hilarious.
So you were washing in rivers and streams, the basics of life, and I presumably using public toilets or whatever as you passed through the villages. Did anybody sort of show you any kindness or take any sympathy on you and let you sleep in their barn and that type of thing?
I suppose if I had any disappointment about the trip, and this would be a very greedy one, it was that I had far less of that sort of hospitality that you often get on journeys such as this, which I've experienced in many countries, and Laurie Lee experienced. And Spain is in a terrible economic place, and what that means is that most villages and towns, all the young people, and by young I mean anyone who's not a pensioner, has essentially left. So the villages are often like shells, ghost towns, or like they're likes of old age pensioner residential places. It was quite sad in that sense, and I suppose that sort of demographic were less likely to invite in this random smelly guy for the night. So only once on the trip I did get invited to stay with a family, and that was lovely to have a shower and to have a conversation. That was a really fantastic part of the trip. But by and large, the kindnesses I received were just the conversations I had in towns and villages as I played, the little chats, occasionally cars stopping, winding down their windows, having a conversation with me. So people were very kind, but I had lesser, say, integration than I might do. For example, when I walk through India, and pretty much every hour someone's taking you into their house to feed you up. I wasn't like that in Spain.
You're obviously fairly fluent in Spanish. Is that something that you've done over the years? Picked that up?
So I did Spanish GCSE at school, but also I spent 3 months cycling through Central America, 3 months in South America, and when I cycled around the world, I spent almost a year cycling through South America. And then when I started the violin lessons for this trip, I also started Spanish lessons through a brilliant website called italki.com. So once a week, I'd have a video Skype call with a lady in Barcelona, and we'd chat away for an hour. And so by the time I got to Spain, my understanding was pretty good. It took me, my grammar is horrible, being self-taught, but I can understand pretty well. And I could pretty much just have a more or less a normal, proper, decent conversation about any subject in Spanish. I didn't speak any English for the whole time. And that really adds to any travel experience. And it's actually, from a personal thing, it's something I was really chuffed with, to feel that, wow, I'm actually doing this. I'm properly just chattering away and understanding people in Spanish. So that was a really nice aspect to the trip.
Yes, I was going to say that if you hadn't done that, it would have been perhaps a little bit alien to try and understand what was going on around you. At least you could appreciate the comments people were making.
Yeah, and I could make little jokes and explain why I was doing the trip and what I was doing. And you just get a bit deeper into the experience when you can actually talk to people. I've had wonderful experiences in cultures where I can't speak a single word and you feel like you're an alien, and that's fun in its own way. But it's much nicer when you can actually make yourself understood.
Definitely, and interact.
You're listening to The Outdoor Station, the home of UK-based audio and video podcasts for lovers of the great outdoors everywhere. Since 2005, over 10 million people have listened, and over 3 million have watched the videos. Sharing the passion, appreciation, and understanding for the outdoors world.
Well, time's moving on now, and I do want to touch on gear because, as I say, I empathise with you regarding the technical side. And I'm guessing, I see you took an Osprey, I think it was about a 50-litre pack, 50, 58, 55, something like that?
55, yeah.
Yeah. And I from the video clips, I surmised that half of it was technology and the rest of it was fairly simple. So let's talk about the technology first of all, just so people understand the amount of work that can go into recording a trip with a view to obviously launching some sort of story at the end of it. I'm guessing you had 2 cameras or 3 cameras?
I had one sort of decent camera, and then I had a couple of GoPro cameras. It's a real juggling act, being someone who loves filming and photography and wants to make something really beautiful, but also someone who has to carry all of this and deal with all the batteries. So the compromise I made was to take one camera, which is a Sony A7, with just one lens, so 24-70. So it gave me a range of shots I could do, and it was sort of adequately beautiful stuff that it generates. And then I took a couple of GoPros, partly so that I could stick them on my violin and all the other places you often see GoPros. And the other reason was that I could have one clipped onto my rucksack. So if anything seemed to be about to happen, I could just quickly press record like a traffic policeman does, just to try and capture that. Because one of the really hard things about trying to film a journey while you're actually experiencing the journey is that so often the good stuff happens before you've had time to press record. I also carried one of the sacrifices I made for weight. So I carried a pretty big, heavy tripod, but I felt that would be worth it. I had the little microphone that goes on the camera. I had a microphone for my GoPro. I had a radio mic, the ones where you could. So there's quite often I'd set the tripod up, and then I'd be quite a long way away on the other side of the village square with the microphone on. So because I was playing such beautiful music, I put more effort into the audio side of things than I would often do, and I'm very glad I did that.
Did you? I mean, all right. Let's go back to the equipment for it. So you got the A7 and you got the GoPros. Then you're going to have a couple of spare batteries each. So you're going to have chargers. Then you're going to have mains power supply. Then you're going to have a power block, and you're going to have a handful of leads. You've got the radio mics. You've got the mic leads, and you've got the rechargeable batteries or batteries for the mics as well. That's a sizable amount of weight.
Yeah, and the solar panel to charge things with. A couple of filters for the LED camera, an ND filter. So there's quite a lot of weight and annoying clutter, and the hassle, the curse of trying to get things charged. I learned quite a good trick, which was because I had a siesta every day, essentially, which sounds luxurious, but is actually incredibly tedious when you have no money to spend, no music to listen to, and no books to read. So what I would do is I'd find some little shop, and just before they closed for siesta, I'd ask them, please, can I plug in all my stuff? And then I'd go sit in the shade for 4 hours until they opened up, and then I'd be on my way. So that was essentially how I dealt with the charging, and the solar, as always, seemed to be more hassle than it was worth. So I had quite a lot of camera gear, and for that reason I completely cursed my choice of rucksack, because I went for a small, lightweight, minimal rucksack, which then meant it was completely jammed full every day, which is always annoying. And the shoulder straps were too lightweight, so it was agony as well. So I made the wrong choice there.
So the rest of the kit that you had in your rucksack, again, looking at your photographs and surmising, do add where I've missed anything off. You had, I think it was an Alp kit tarp.
Yes.
It looked like an Alp kit titanium mug.
Yes.
A plastic spork of some kind.
Stolen from my baby child.
two shirts, trousers, and a shirt.
No, one shirt.
One shirt. I saw the rip at the end of it, so it obviously lasted the journey.
Yeah, it was it was a bit manky by the end. Yes, yeah, just the one set of clothes, but I had 2 pairs of socks.
2 pairs of socks. Okay, you're really going for it. And what sleeping mat? It was a thermarest. It was a foam mat, wasn't it? One of the eggshell mats.
Yes, yeah. Which the Z ones, and I would. My hips really started to hurt on this trip. I'm getting old. So the good thing about those is you can fold them into a bit of a Z shape. So you sacrifice some head and foot length for triple thickness around your hips. So yeah, I'm quite a big fan of those roll mats.
And a sleeping bag or a sleeping quilt?
a very, very, very thin sleeping bag, which is lovely, really, really thin, and a silk liner to go in it for a bit of an illusion of warmth and comfort. I also had a raincoat, although it never rained.
So looking at the contents of your rucksack then, one simple question. What was the best piece of kit and what was the worst piece of kit?
The worst piece of kit was the rucksack, but that actually, the fault of that was me having the wrong rucksack. So it's almost unfair to blame the rucksack. But I did spend every day blaming the rucksack because it really hurt. I think that's a bit of a false economy, going for a really lightweight pack when you've got a long way to walk and it's jammed full with batteries. So in a similar vein, I came to really appreciate the trekking poles. I had these Lecky folding ones, and I really found them very helpful for taking the strain off my knees, and pointing. Makes you feel important when you point at things with them. So I liked those. I just cooked on fires every evening, so I had a little flint to light the fire, and then the small little pan to cook on and eat out of as well. I really, apart from all of the tedious camera electronics, I really loved how ridiculously lightweight I went on this trip, to just have essentially one pair of clothes. And it's of course it's nice being in Spain in the summertime for that, but that I really, really enjoyed knowing that I'm pretty much using every item of kit every single day. You just really got the bare minimum, but that's all you need.
And that's the crux of it, isn't it? It is about all you need. It's needs and wants, as a friend of mine used to say. It's all about needs and wants.
Well, yeah, and I try my best on. I quite like the ascetic, masochistic simplicity of journeys. So I try to deliberately have fewer wants than I might like. So I quite like to have stuff that I'm missing, so I want to get home for a bit of comfort, rather than trying to just pack loads of comfortable stuff and essentially take home with me. So one example of that is I really like it on a trip if a few nights I sleep a bit badly because I'm cold. Even when I put on all my clothes, even my raincoat, and you still have a couple of nights that are a little bit of a shiver. And I actually quite like that, because it makes me think, oh, good, I haven't brought too many clothes. Nearly all of the time I'm fine. Just occasionally I'm a bit cold. Good, I've got the kit right on this one.
And coming back to the meals, I know you cooked in the evenings. Was it just one meal a day that you had, or did you sort of manage to scrounge something as you went through the day?
So the first thing I would buy whenever I earned money was a big loaf of bread. In most European countries, you get your big loaves of fresh bread in every village. So that was always something that was my first thing I'd always buy. In the evenings, I had a bag of rice, which lasted me for ages, or some pasta. And into that, I would just chuck, depending on how much I'd earned, either nothing much at all, or a few carrots, onions, tomatoes, or a tin of sardines if I was feeling pretty rich that day. But generally throughout the day, I'd eat bread and bananas, and peanuts are very cheap in Spain. Just whatever random fruit was out of date in the supermarket and about to be thrown away. And then in the evening would be the one cooked meal I had. So I didn't have, so here's a want thing. I didn't have any tea or coffee, which I often missed. So in the evenings, I'd just make myself a pan full of hot water and pretend it was a cup of tea.
And what about water, hydration, and obviously drinking water? How did you manage on that front?
Being Spain and a big hot place, I carried a Ortlieb water bag, 10-litre water bag, which has been one of my favourite bits of kit for about 20 years now. I love the freedom it gives you, knowing that if needs be, you can carry 10 litres of water. So I had that to top up in the evenings. I also had a Camelback, the things with the like a bladder thing with a straw over my shoulders that I could drink as I was walking, and yeah, that was it. So a big 10-litre bag, and then the 2-litre bladder. But I was very rarely carrying 12 litres, but it was nice to know that I could if I needed to.
Well, an extra 12k would have been great fun. What I was referring to was actually getting drinkable water. Where did you get your water from?
Oh, I got my drinking water either most of the time just from cafes, or I tell you where I got it from. And when you asked that, I thought I know the answer, and then I couldn't think of it. I got the water most days from the village fuente, the village fountain. Pretty much every village in Spain has a central fountain, which I presume was where originally everyone got their water from. And so, most villages I would just fill up from there, dunk my head, soak my shirt, and walk on. And pretty much every village I got to, I'd drink like a camel. I'd just gulp down as much as I could, so I didn't have to carry too much. But most of the times that's where I got my water.
Oh, I never realised that water was potable.
Well, I'm still alive. I have to say, I've always had a fairly reckless attitude to water safety. But I think, I think it is drinkable, and also they're often very proud of it. So I remember in one village, I started to fill up at this fuente, and an old lady saying, "Oh, you should go to the other one's much sweeter water." But so I had to walk about 500 meters uphill, which I was really cursing, to go for this allegedly sweeter water. So no, I think it is drinking water.
Cool. Well, it sounds like a fantastic journey and great experience for a whole variety of different reasons compared to sort of traditional, in inverted commas, adventures that people expect as regards extremes. But the one thing I wanted to just touch on with you, if I may, is when did you actually start doing? I know you cycled around the world. That was your first big trip. But when was that?
That my cycling around the world was 2001 to 2005. Which is a long time ago now.
Indeed. Well, I mean, YouTube started in 2005, and Facebook, I think it was just before. It was just coming to the fore then. And when did you sort of manage to take the adventuring and turn it into, or get the shock of actually turning it into some sort of income?
Well, mentioning those two things, YouTube and Facebook, I look back and I'm so glad that I cycle around the world. Firstly, before they existed, and also before I was doing it for a so-called job, and I was just cycling around the world because I wanted to cycle around the world. I took 3,000 photographs in 4 years. I nowadays quite regularly take more than that in a week when I'm off doing something for a magazine or something. So I'm very, very grateful about the style in which I got to cycle around the world. But when I came back from that trip, I wanted to write a book. So to pay for my life whilst I wrote the book, I started giving talks at primary schools about the countries and cultures and adventures I'd visited, all that sort of stuff, and gradually starting to earn a bit of money from it. So it's more or less started from 2005 thinking, I wonder if I can somehow turn this into my job. And like anyone self-employed, there are quite a few stressful early years when you're wondering where the next paycheck, or in my case, where the next talk or the next magazine article would come from. But little by little, I've built it up to where I now, I write books, I give talks. I've started doing increasing numbers of films with and for brands. And a lot of that is sort of short social media films. And I've got fingers in sufficient pies to feel that I'm quite comfortable now in having made the adventure my job, which I'm very, very grateful for.
Well, certainly, yes. The life of the self-employed is famine or feast, and no matter what stage you're at. And I was just thinking, your work and your history of films and content has obviously inspired a lot of people to do adventures in different formats. And I know you're very, very keen at the moment pushing the micro adventures thing. And as a result, obviously, there are people equally inspired by you to consider that it might make some sort of career from this. But if you were to start again yourself now, what advice would you give to yourself?
Oh, gosh. I would tell myself, thinking for my first big adventure, I'd tell myself to go more slowly, to accept more invitations, take more detours, and to stop being so hard on myself. I was just ridiculous. It was a ridiculous masochistic torture fest because I had this weird notion that if ever I was happy, that meant I was no longer on an adventure. I was on holiday, and therefore, for this to count as an adventure, I must be permanently punishing myself. So I tell myself to be a bit kinder to myself. And then in terms of trying to make a career, I would tell the younger me to just really concentrate on telling good stories, get really good, or as good as you can at photography and filmmaking and writing, and just concentrate on doing those things really, really, really well. Don't go chasing the vanity metrics and the numbers of likes and followers and all that sort of stuff. Because if you do the main things well, first of all, you keep some sort of sanity and integrity. And secondly, all of the other fluff, the likes and the followers and the money follows along after that. So I think I would remind myself just to keep things the right way around.
That's interesting. So looking at your current position, advising people or inspiring people to seek adventure where they can, I am always an advocate of, if you're going to achieve something, there's usually a sacrifice you have to make somewhere along the way. And it can take many forms, whether it's financial, money, family, relationships, whatever. What do you find now, personally, is the hardest thing that you have to justify or quantify for yourself before you start a new project?
I think it's the projection, it's a standard progression, I think, for most people in life, is in that my projects used to be limited by a lack of money. And now that I'm middle-aged, they seem to be limited by a lack of time. So I have to think really hard about if what I'm doing, does that justify the time that's going into it? So time is my biggest, most precious thing that I try to be conscious about before embarking on anything. So, for example, I've been interested in the idea of starting a podcast, as you're doing, but I'm hesitant to do so because in my mind, something needs to get removed from the schedule in order for me to do that.
Okay, my final question. Coming back to the book itself and the journey itself through Spain, of all the things I could have asked you about the trip, what should I have asked you?
Oof. That in itself is a good question. I think you should have asked me I think you should have said, you call yourself an adventurer, but all you've done is go on a pensioner's rambling holiday through Spain. That's not a proper adventure. Proper adventure is when you used to row oceans and cycle around the world.
Well, that's a statement, not a question. Come on, what would your answer be to that?
That's an insult. Okay.
yeah. Slap me with a fish.
Okay, so maybe I would be terrible at a podcast if I can't ask questions. But I think that I think would be the question: is does this actually count as an adventure? Because it was something I was conscious of, thinking, and at the moment, I'm talking about this adventure, and I know that there are countless people who've done far, far longer walks and tougher journeys and all sorts of stuff. So I was very conscious that the younger version of me would have sneered at this trip. But I think that's part of the whole point of it, was the younger me wanted one thing out of adventure, and the older me is looking for something very different. And the thing that stood out for me time and again on that trip was just how casually I was walking hundreds of miles and camping outdoors, and how nervous I was about standing up in front of 5 people in a village plaza. And I think the biggest lesson I took from the whole trip, which hopefully will help me in the years to come, was that the way I live adventurously has evolved, and I imagine will continue to evolve as my life progresses. And I think seeing adventure through a much broader prism than just man walks over mountain has been a real revelation for me.
It's a fine point Alastair makes. As time goes by, our idea of adventure evolves, and the experience he describes in the book will hit the nail on the head for many readers, I'm sure. Please check out the show notes on the Outdoor Station for direct links to the book, My Midsummer Morning, images from his trip, and to view his biography. My thanks to Alastair for joining me on this podcast, and I hope you found it interesting and inspiring in some way. As always, feedback and comments are always welcome. So until next time, folks, take care out there, and don't forget to have a little mini adventure of your own. Until next time, folks, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.